Hey everyone, it's Joe from Gadgetry Tech, and in today's video, I'm reviewing the HyperX Cloud III. Finally, a new cloud, and it's replacing the Cloud II, which came out in 2008. Now, this headset was not sent to me for review. I purchased this, which is why I didn't get to release my review on launch day. I had to use it for a little bit since it came out. Thankfully, my local stores carry it. So here we are. Now, it won't affect what I say about the review, whether I purchase it or not. I always try to keep things fair, and I purchased this because this is a big launch in my opinion. The Cloud II was like a legend in the $100 and below category, and they made a lot of changes with the new ones. So I wanted to see if that was all for the better or if we're missing out on anything. So with that being said, I'm gonna have chapters in the video or in the description below. So be sure to use that if you only care about particular portions. I'll also have links in the description to help you find and purchase it. Generic affiliate links. I have no affiliation with HyperX, at least for now, but that will support the channel. Otherwise, just buy it however you like if you decide this is the right one for you. Now, admittedly, I don't have the Cloud IIs. I have the Cloud X's, which is the same headset and driver and chassis as the Cloud II. It's basically just a cheaper version that did not come with the USB DAC, and it didn't come with the extra pads. So it's essentially the same. I guess we'll call it the same spirit animal. But I wanted to have these side by side because I want to show you the chassis differences and what they changed. It has, you can tell it's a Cloud. They have the similar design with the fork system, but the new one is more slender, I guess. It's just, there's more of like a three-dimensional angle going on. It's better sculpted. And you can see that the entire driver system is angled now. The entire cup is no longer just a straight oval. Now, there are some similarities because you can't have, like, there's no rotation on this one. And when you look at this model, there's no rotation here either. There's a little bit of movement. You still get the pivot in and out, but ultimately it's a very similar design. They also have a much more sleek buckle, basically what's mounting the aluminum fork to the steel headband. It's still metal, which is great from a quality perspective, but this is a single piece buckle now, so it's even less likely to split than the old one. And if there's one thing that the old one had a reputation was aside from sound quality, it was the durability. These things were built like tanks. Probably one of the best built sub $100 headsets that's been on the market for quite some time. And they took that to heart and did a big focus on this with the new design because it's the same or better from everything I've been able to touch and play with. Now, the microphone is also a massive upgrade. They went from a less expensive, lower quality sounding 6mm capsule to a 10mm capsule, and this microphone is gorgeous. It has an integrated pop filter. The length of the mic is just right. The resistance is just right. Honestly, I'm gonna get ahead of myself, but screw it. You know, let's just be candid here. This headset is pretty damn amazing because the HyperX was always a good sounding headset and they have a new sound profile, but they made it just better basically in every single way. I was concerned because HP bought HyperX, so I didn't know if that was going to cheapen the headset in any sense, but it almost seems like they went the opposite direction. Now, it's not all perfect because one of the other things that changed is the new one has no physical DAC buttons. It's basically just a USB cable on one side and a combo port on the other, 3.5mm, which means you can use any headset with this technically. You get a USB-C cable instead of the A, and it's a detachable USB-C to A adapter. It's actually a beautiful cable too. There's no real microphonics in it. It's almost like a really high quality shoelace nylon material, and I love the touch of red. This red on the fork is absolutely stunning in person. It's probably the best looking red I've seen on a gaming product before. So kudos for that paint job. It's pretty slick. Now, unfortunately, like the old one, there's still no detachable cable. I think they're doing that to keep people interested in the Alpha, which is a more premium headset. However, this is still a really nice cable, and my old ones have held up fine, so I'm assuming that's going to still be the case. Just some people like having detachable. Because they got rid of the DAC with controls, I mentioned this has everything built in. The old one, the Cloud II, had volume adjustment and mic volume adjustment on the DAC and a 7.1 button. The new one, they foregoed the virtual 7.1 surround, foregoed. And they went with a lifetime license of Dolby DTS, which is cool because at least that's being supported ongoing. So in theory, it can only get the same or better over time. It's not like you're gonna run into issues later. So some people are gonna miss having the physical controls here. However, this has an analog volume wheel. So you would set your Windows volume to max and then adjust your headset volume through the headset. That's gonna give you the best possible dynamic range typically, but you can play with it however you want. You get split volume control. Now on the left side of the ear cup, you have a microphone mute button. This is a tap to mute, and you can hear a nice little tactile click. It's not too loud, but what's really cool about this is there's a little capacitor inside, because this is an analog headset, right? There's no active power going to this right now. And if you plug this into like an Xbox controller or a PS5 controller and bypass the DAC, you'll have a little red status light right on the microphone telling you you're muted, which is really cool because they're doing that without any batteries or a special, chip inside. I've seen this before on the older Lucid Sound LS10. That headset came out years ago, and I thought that was a pretty nifty feature because getting that kind of status light on a non-powered headset is pretty awesome. So moving on, the other thing that stands out is the pads. They look the same on the outside, but when you take a closer look, you can see that the Cloud 3 has a thicker pad. This new pad is awesome. It is so plush. There's actually little vents inside the pad. I doubt I'm going to get that on the camera, but you can actually see the little blue memory foam through those holes. That helps a little bit with breathability, but I think they're doing it for audio tuning as well. You even have the vent up here, which is a pretty large vent. And you do hear some sound leakage on the outside. So some people can hear what you're listening to, but nothing like an open back headphone, which basically lets out everything. The other thing I want to show you, if I take this off, they switched to an angled driver baffle. Instead of having an ear cup where the driver is basically flat on your ear like the old one, this is a much more basic design. You got to think, this came out in 2008. Things were a little bit different back then. They weren't as advanced as far as a molding standpoint goes, at least from this price point. So they upgraded the driver baffle, and the end result of doing this is your soundstage or your imaging, instead of being left and right only, it's pushed forward just slightly, and it has a more natural interaction with your ears because your ears are angled slightly forward. So they play into that, and that does help with imaging performance. I'll get into sound quality soon, but basically they made ergonomic changes to help with comfort. The headband padding is thicker. It's a beautiful headband. The pads are thicker. Overall, just everything just feels right on the Cloud 3. It fits my ears perfectly, and that extra depth means my ears aren't basically resting up against the baffle anymore, unlike the old one. Now the Cloud 3 is only coming with one set of pads. It's the thicker leatherette, of course, like I said. And for those who have looked into Wicked Cushions or other parties' pads, on the old one, they'll still work on the new one. They're actually the same opening on the outside edge, even though it's all angled. They still fit. The only thing I want to point out is you have to stretch the aftermarket pads a bit. Like this particular model, I'll put a link in the description for this Wicked Cushion one, but you can see the cutout is smaller. This does stretch enough to fit. It doesn't quite sit on the driver baffle the same as the stock pad does, but in case you want to switch to a gel and get an even thicker pad, you can do that too. So if you're curious about the weight, thicker pads typically weigh more. So even with that, this weighs 304 grams. And if I look at the older one, which has thinner pads on both the headband and the ear pad, it's 270 grams. Both of these are extremely light. It's almost half of the weight of the Odyssey Maxwell that I've reviewed, which has been a pretty popular high-end headphone. So these are pretty light. Obviously they're analog, so there's not as much stuff inside, but this wears extremely well. Just to kind of wrap up build quality and comfort, the old HyperX Cloud was one of the best built headsets from a durability standpoint. This appears and feels to be the same or better. It's super flexible. There's no weird noises. They're using metal, dual hinge design. The pads being thicker means that you can wear glasses with these comfortably and still actually have a good seal, so it's not going to negatively impact your sound. The lighter weight and the clamp force is perfect. It is actually a really light clamp force, and they can get away with that because it's a light headset. So it doesn't need a lot of clamp to stay in place. This is just a very good endurance headset, even with the leatherette pad. Now, in case you're curious about the pad dimensions, I'm just going to measure it real quick. You have about 65, 67 millimeters of height. And then if I go to the width on the interior dimensions, it's about 40 millimeters. It's not the widest opening, but because it's tall, it should still feel pretty comfortable. And if you are curious about the pad compression test, you have a pretty symmetric compression as well, which means when you're wearing this, you're not going to feel any odd pressure points or weird feelings in your ear because it's not compressing evenly. It's a good solid pad, and I think it's going to fit most people fine. All right, now I'm talking on the Cloud 3 microphone. This is what my voice sounds like using no changes in post-production. I'm not modifying anything. My volume is at the default 100. This microphone isn't overly sensitive. It's not overly sharp, but it's also not overly clear either. It's kind of like a flat tone microphone.
When you hear it compared to the Cloud 2, they have a very different sound signature, and some people may like one of the over the other. I also think it depends on what kind of voice you have as well. So anyway, this is what the Cloud 3 microphone sounds like. Curious what you think. All right, now I'm talking on the Cloud 2 microphone. Very different sound signature. I'm not going to say one's better than the other necessarily, but I think this will open up quite a bit of discussion on what people think. So now you can hear them both side by side, and I'm connected to the same DAC that the Cloud 3 came from. I'm not doing any changes, literally just unplugged it and plugged this in. That way it's as fair as possible.
Now, for those of you that are new to the channel, I like to measure every product I have because even though I do form my own opinion and subjective thoughts, I also want to use the measurements because you can't really hide behind that. And if you're going by that alone, it gives a fair perspective because now my opinion is taken out of it. So I measured the Cloud 3, as you see here on the screen, in analog form. So basically, this is with an analog cable from the headset directly into a DAC that's not doing any sound processing whatsoever, just a flat signal going into the headset. And this is what the sound signature is like. The reason why I measure it without the DAC first is because this is how it'll sound connected to a PlayStation controller or an Xbox. Now I will say this, the DAC, the USB DAC, works on PS5 and it sounds amazing. So if you can plug all the way into your console and you're not too far, use that. I think it sounds a little bit better. So otherwise, this is what it measures like. Now, this is actually not a bad sound signature because the upper mid-range and treble isn't too forward or bright. Obviously, you have this one peak, but that's kind of unique to the peak that my measuring rig saw. Overall, when you look at what's called the Harman curve, this is like a preferred sound curve. Keep in mind, this is a $100 gaming headset. Don't expect close adherence to Harman. But I want to explain the advantage to this sound signature. Usually when I make custom EQs for FPS and gaming, I tend to boost the 100 to 120 hertz a little bit, and I reduce the sub bass, which is the stuff down here, the deeper bass, because that cleans up the bass so you can still pinpoint things like footsteps and details even when there's an explosion happening. The natural sound signature of the Alpha 3 already has this. So it's probably one of the least necessary $100 headsets I've ever, or least necessary headsets to tune for FPS at this price range. It has a great sound. It dips into the mid-range, but not by much. This is a pretty normal curve that you would want. The difference is it's not as forward or sharp sounding in the upper mid-range. So if you like the SteelSeries Nova sound or the Arctis sound, which is a little bit more forward and shouty, they have nice, tight, punchy bass. This is a very different sound signature. It's more reserved bass, and the treble isn't so sharp. Think of it as a smooth over, easier to listen to sound presentation. Now, if I enable the DAC and I plug this headset into the USB DAC that's included, you can see a different sound signature. This pinkish purplish line, I should have picked different colors, but I'm highlighting it now. That reduces some of that extra bass hump in the upper bass, lower mids region. And then the treble tuning is relatively comparable. You can see a little bit of a change in the upper frequencies. If anything, it might be more smooth. They basically flattened out the sound signature. So if someone's been looking for a gaming headset, but they want a flatter sound, the Cloud 3 with the DAC will give you that. Now, this still doesn't get close to Harman, and then you don't get that hump that I was talking about for FPS. So I did provide a tune. If you use my tune, what I did was I lifted some of the sub bass back up. This is more of like a music tune, and then I lifted the upper mid-range and treble a little bit more up here. So here is a picture of the EQ using the Ngenuity software. Normally I would give you a whole spiel about the software that comes with the headset. However, I wasn't too fond of the HyperX Ngenuity program. I had issues with it. It wasn't doing any of the custom EQ for me when I was applying it. I had to manually download and install the Microsoft Visual Studio like C++, so the redistributable. So I'll have a link in the description in case yours isn't working either. Once I did that and rebooted, I was finally able to start doing custom EQ. That then exposed how bad the custom EQ program is, because anything over like 1 decibel above the 0 mark, the flat, added a ton of distortion. It made the headset sound terrible. And I tried different sample rates because the default was 24-bit 48 kilohertz, which is awesome. And this goes up to 96 kilohertz. But I tried 16-bit 44 and all the way up to the 24-bit 96. And it didn't fix my issue. I always had distortion. So the program didn't really like adding decibels or adding bass or adding treble. What I had to do is if I wanted to add bass, I would have to reduce treble. So kind of change the way you're thinking about EQing if you are planning on doing this. And my tune that I just showed you reflects that. I'm taking stuff down to compensate and get the result I want. That way I can give myself the sound profile I'm looking for. Now, what makes it even more complicated is when I enabled custom EQ on Ngenuity, it didn't sound as clear. There's some weird processing happening in the program that I thought compressed the sound a little bit, and it almost like sucked some of the breadth and detail out of it. So I wasn't a huge fan of the software. Thankfully, the stock sound signature is excellent. However, if you're looking to do custom EQ, I wouldn't necessarily use the Ngenuity software unless you want to use DTS. I'm not a big fan of DTS, but that's your own personal preference. You can always try it. I recommend using Equalizer APO. It's a free EQ program with the Piece add-on, or you can even download SteelSeries Sonar, which is free, and that gives you a very powerful EQ, but you get a lot of extra blow with it. So it's kind of like, what you think is worth the, computer resources or not. And then one last thing, just to show you how the old Cloud 2 measured compared to the new Cloud 3, you can see a drastically different sound signature. The Cloud 2s were much more punchy. The bass hit harder, they were deeper, and they had more treble. They almost sound sharp in comparison, and I'm not a huge fan of the Cloud 2s. They were fine for gaming, and they were really far ahead of their time back then because it's basically a Techstar 80 audiophile headphone that was repurposed for gaming. But I like the sound signature of the new one because the bass is more refined, it's cleaner. The upper mid-range and treble to me is easier to play with. It plays everything. It's not going to sound as lively or punchy as something you might be used to, but at the same time, there's not one thing that's going to sound bad on it. It's not going to sound too sharp or too bassy and you lose the detail. So I like the Cloud 3 profile better. Now, as you saw with the objective side and the measurements, I kind of alluded to how this sounds to an extent, and I think what the takeaway of this is it's a more subdued version of the Cloud 2. Don't expect the same punchy bass or the same sharp treble. However, this is like the Cloud 2 grew up and is now wearing a suit and tie. It's just more refined, and I feel like it's more versatile. I'm sensitive to strong upper mid-range and treble, so I don't like too much of that. You can still have great detail on a good product like this without blasting your ears with treble. It's also a more rewarding listening experience because you don't have to turn it down because you're not damaging your ears. You can maintain a comfortable volume that's easy to work with. And because of that, that means you can listen to music in a truer to original form. I think music sounds great on the Cloud 3s. Some people might want to punch up the bass a little bit or the treble a little bit. But the good news is you can do that with the Cloud 3. The drivers handle that without any problem whatsoever. But what you can't EQ is comfort and build quality, and that's where they knocked it out of the park. If you're trying to compare or decide against other headsets, I have all these, I'm just not digging them out right now, but the Corsair HS80 is very comfortable and has the best microphone, but it doesn't have as good of sound quality, and the build quality is, I've heard mixed things online. My HS80 is still fine, and I've used it a lot, but I've seen some people with premature failure where that doesn't really happen with the HyperX. If you compare it to Razer, the Black Shark V2 comes to mind. It's the same price point. It's extremely comfortable. I love wearing the Black Shark lineup from a comfort standpoint. The sound quality is very different. That is very bass boosted. It's like heavy, that little bit of muddy and warmth. It can be okay and pretty immersive on some games, but as soon as you listen to music, it does not sound true to the music. It's too bass boosted. Then you get the SteelSeries. So I actually like the Nova 1 a lot at 60. But I really like the Arctis Prime, the old one, because that used to be $100. It has good drivers in it, and now it's down to like $70. The Arctis Prime is still a really good headset nowadays. The microphone's okay, build quality's okay. It's still comfortable because of the suspension head strap. And on racing games, the Arctis Prime has a little bit more visceralness to the bass. You can almost like feel the engine vibrating more in your head. So it sounds more immersive, but it's also more forward in the upper mid-range and treble, which some people can be sensitive to. It's more of a traditional V-shape and can come across as harsh sounding to some. But if you need that punchy bass and you want that bright treble, the SteelSeries Arctis Prime isn't really a bad headset to consider when you factor in the discount. So that about sums up the video. Normally I don't ramble as much as I did with this one because it's kind of caught me by surprise. They really, to me, improved everything on the Cloud 2. I like basically everything about this more than the Cloud 2. I think some of the differences might come down to personal preference, but I seriously love this headset. I really do. I think for $100, it's an absolute home run. Normally, I don't say that. I don't have a strong enough opinion because I want you to decide what you like. But man, it's built like a tank and it's so comfortable. So you get the durability and comfort, and it sounds great in everything. You can listen to music on this, then go play games, and it's still competitive while also being immersive when you need it. So I think it's a great balance, and at $100, the value proposition is top notch. So I hope you found this video helpful. Don't forget to like and subscribe. I'd love to see you at the next video. And with that being said, I'll see you next time.